All right, so are you ready to dive into some really cool research about language learning?
Always. I think we all know someone who's struggled with learning a new language, right?
Right, totally. And it turns out there's a lot more to it than just memorizing vocabulary and like all the grammar rules.
Yeah, there's this whole fascinating world of how our brains actually acquire language.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to uncover in this deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
So we've got excerpts from two really interesting sources. First up is Changing Methodologies in TESOL by Jane Spiro.
Okay, so that sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And you know what? When I first picked it up, I thought it was going to be like a really dry textbook, but it's actually super practical. Like it's packed with all these useful tips for teachers.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's about how to actually teach language effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And then we've got Second Language Acquisition and Task-Based Language Teaching by Mike Long. And this one, I'll be honest, it's a bit more on the theoretical side.
I was going to say, that's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, it's definitely denser, but in a good way. It really digs into the cognitive science behind language acquisition.
So we've got Spiro for the practical classroom strategies and Long for the nitty-gritty science. I like it.
Exactly. And the really interesting thing is that they both challenge those, traditional grammar-heavy approaches to language learning.
Yeah, like those endless verb conjugation drills. I think we can all agree those aren't the most exciting.
Seriously. So Spiro, she talks about using games in language teaching, which I gotta admit, at first I was a little skeptical.
Games, like what kind of games are we talking about here?
Yeah, right. But she explains how these aren't just any games. They're like cleverly designed with constraints and incentives to actually make learning more effective.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Do you have an example?
Yeah, so she gives this example of teaching prepositions, those tricky words like under, over, behind. And instead of just like drilling them over and over, she suggests turning it into a treasure hunt.
Oh, that's kind of brilliant.
Right. I mean, I don't know about you, but if my language classes had involved treasure hunts, I probably would have paid way more attention.
Seriously. It's amazing how a little creativity can make all the difference. And you know what this reminds me of? Long's work on implicit learning.
Oh, yeah, he talks about that a lot. But how does it tie in with the games?
Well, implicit learning is basically how we pick up languages without even realizing it, right? Like how kids learn their first language. In games, especially those that involve, real-world interactions, they can actually tap into that same powerful mechanism.
So instead of memorizing verb conjugations from a textbook, you're learning through experience, like by playing a game or something.
Exactly. Think about it like learning to ride a bike. You didn't sit down and memorize a physics textbook, right?
Yeah, you just kind of figure it out.
Exactly. You learn by doing. And implicit learning leverages that same, intuitive process, but for language.
Wow, that's actually really cool. It makes you realize how much we can learn just by, immersing ourselves in an experience.
Exactly. And that's why these more interactive, engaging approaches can be so much more effective than traditional methods.
Right. And this is where Long throws in a real curveball. He calls adults partially disabled language learners.
What? Wait, is he serious? Partially disabled.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It sounds kind of harsh.
It does. So does that mean we're all doomed to speak with an accent forever?
That's what I was wondering. Should we just give up now?
I mean, I hope not.
Me too.
I'm dying to hear how he explains this one. Okay. So I think what he's getting at is that, yeah, our brains do change as we get older.
Right.
And that can make it, trickier to pick up those native, accents and stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've always struggled with rolling my R's in Spanish.
Totally. But he's not saying we can't learn, right?
Right. So it's not about ability. It's more about, how we approach language learning as adults.
Exactly. We might need different strategies.
Okay, so then what's the secret? If grammar drills aren't the answer, what is?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Long is a big proponent of something called task-based language teaching.
I've heard of that. TBLT. Right.
Yes, TBLT. So instead of just, learning grammar rules in isolation,
Right.
It's all about giving students real-world tasks to complete in the target language.
Okay, I think I get it, but can you give me an example?
Sure. So let's say you're learning Spanish, right? Instead of just conjugating verbs in a workbook, you and your classmates might plan a hypothetical trip to, say, Barcelona.
Oh, fun!
Right. But you have to do it all in Spanish, booking flights, navigating the city, ordering food.
Wow, that actually sounds kind of fun.
It is. And that's the whole point. It makes the learning process so much more engaging and meaningful.
They're practical, too.
Absolutely. It's like you're learning the language by actually using it to do stuff, not just by memorizing rules.
So it's less about like achieving perfect grammar and more about actually being able to communicate and get things done.
Exactly. Think about those like classic language textbooks,
Yeah.
The dialogues are always so stilted and unnatural.
Oh my gosh, yes. I remember learning phrases like the pen is on the table and thinking, when am I ever going to use this?
Right. But with TBLT, the tasks themselves provide all the context and motivation.
I see, I see.
Because you're so focused on like completing the task, you're not even consciously thinking about the grammar rules anymore.
You're just doing it.
Exactly. Just like you did when you were a kid learning your first language.
It's funny, right? Like we spend so much time as adults trying to like analyze and intellectualize everything. But sometimes the most effective way to learn is just to like dive in and let our brains do their thing.
Totally. And that's actually something Long emphasizes a lot. He says adult learners really need to embrace those like childlike qualities of curiosity, playfulness, and a willingness to make mistakes.
That's so true. We're often so afraid of making mistakes, but that's how we learn, right?
Exactly. Mistakes are just feedback. They tell us what we need to work on.
In the context of language learning, I feel like every mistake is like a funny story waiting to happen.
Right. Like that time you accidentally told the waiter you were pregnant instead of saying you were full.
Oh my gosh, yes, those stories are the best. Okay, but seriously, I think that's such an important point. We need to shift our mindset from seeing language learning as like this test to be passed to seeing it as like a journey to be enjoyed,
100%. It's about the experience,
Yeah.
not just the outcome.
Yes. It's about embracing the messiness, the challenges, and all little triumphs along the way.
And ultimately, it's about recognizing that language learning is a gift we give ourselves.
I love that. It's a gift. It's not just about practicality. It's about personal growth, expanding your horizons. It's like you're opening yourself up to a whole new way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And connecting with people in a whole new way, too.
It's like suddenly you have this ability to connect with people you might never have been able to before.
And to experience things you might never have even known existed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's like totally inspired right now and wants to ditch the textbooks and just dive into learning a new language, what advice would you give them based on, everything we've talked about today?
That's a good question. I'd say, first of all, don't be afraid to have fun with it. Find what you enjoy, whether it's music, movies, podcasts.
Video games.
Yes. Video games even. Whatever gets you excited about the language.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Oh my gosh, yes. Embrace the mistakes. They're inevitable and they're how you learn.
They really are. It's like the more mistakes you make, the more you're actually learning.
Exactly. So be patient with yourself. Celebrate those small victories.
Yes, and remember, it's about the journey, not the destination.
Right. 100%. Make it an adventure.
Yes. This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
It really has.
We've covered so much ground. We talked about the power of games in language learning,
The science of how our brains acquire language,
the importance of task-based learning.
and the idea of language learning as a gift, a form of self-discovery.
Yes. It's not just about, like, adding another skill to your resume. It's about so much more than that. It's about expanding your horizons, connecting with the world in a deeper way. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive. Big thanks to you, as always, for sharing your incredible insights.
Always a pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep those brains buzzing.
And most importantly, never stop exploring.